today we're talking about preparing our children for adulthood and beyond. I think we're pulling things out from the rug today. We're saying things as they are. And I think this topic is long overdue. So perhaps we could start by asking you your opinion. And that is, why do you think it's important to prepare our children for adulthood and beyond? And in that same token, do you see the importance of this with our current generation of children? Why is this so important, and is this already happening or not?
I think, as you said, this well, this topic is well overdue for us to really dig into, because the one thing I always like to remind people of is that we're not raising children; we're raising adults. And we lose sight of this. That's why we keep wanting them to have the best childhood they can have. And then hopefully that by the time they're ready to face adulthood, they don't kind of yearn for childhood or something. I don't know. That logic always escapes me. But the important thing is that we're seeing more and more, especially with the increased divorce rates and the increased social upheaval, that we're not raising adults. We're raising very ill-equipped grown-ups. And that's because I think we are focused on the wrong side of things. And I think we've also lost the value and the wisdom that has been passed on to us in ways that we might have found unpalatable in some cases. And because of that, we've discarded the value and the wisdom of it because of the method that was used. And we haven't found a healthier way to pass on that wisdom and value to the next generation. So, yes, I believe that we need a serious rethink in how we're approaching raising children.
Absolutely. Well, that's a lot to unpack, inshallah, definitely. We're talking about our children, growing up from a young age and us wanting to connect them with the world around them. Most of them are very well connected with social media, sometimes too well connected. But talking about having them connected to the world around them, also the world within. But how do we empower them more so with that world within, spiritually? And as someone who works with people from different age groups, who has his own family, what age do we start empowering our children spiritually, do you think?
I think that's from the time that they've been conceived and the mother is pregnant, that we have to already bear that in mind. The thing about spirituality that I find quite intriguing is that it's not something that anyone can deliberately adopt. You can't choose to become a spiritual person. I think you become a spiritual person through reflection and introspection and understanding. And so it's a result of a lot of environmental influences, and it's a result of what we're exposed to. So if you're exposed to an environment that ritualizes your spirituality, then you're not going to be very spiritual, you're going to be very ritual. And if you come from an environment that is driven by harsh discipline, then you're going to be harshly disciplined and you're going to discipline harshly. But spirituality is not going to be part of it. And that's where we struggle the most, is that inner peace that we're supposed to experience with our connection to our value system and our beliefs and everything else. That inner peace is lost because spirituality in itself is absent from the way we live. And I think that's what's lacking in a lot of homes, is that the spirituality, we almost need to define that in some way, because we've kind of lost ourselves to tradition and ritual and custom.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. When it comes to that spiritual nurturing, do you see it more as something that needs to be done in the home, within the home, or is it something that is community-based? Is it mentorship-based? Yeah.
I think spirituality is derived, or at least we connect with it through how it is that we see others ground themselves in a spiritual way. So when I said it starts basically in the womb, is because whatever it is that the mother will draw comfort from in that moment, or what the people around her would offer as comfort in that moment, in those times, and then we build on that beyond the womb, so to speak, and the child is then exposed to a certain tone in the environment. That is what connects them with their take on what spirituality feels like. So if we're not aware of what we're giving, of what we're doing, because, like we always say, children don't do as you say, they do as you do. And this, I think, very, very profoundly connects us with how important it is for recognizing what our children are taking from us rather than what we're trying to instill in them.
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking about the lessons that we can learn of what not to do when it comes to children, their spiritual development. Why would you say it's important to build a relationship with our children, no matter their age, where we can explain the deen to them and we can have meaningful conversations, debates, discussions, rather than it being this very aggressive, this is haram, salah, you have to do this, and it's just so ritualistic, and we just close that off, and there's no door of communication, and there's no opportunity to ask or to ponder or even to reflect as an invitation towards spirituality. Tell us more about one part of spiritual development, please.
I think that's such an important question and so many dimensions to it, because it talks about how it is that we discipline, it talks about how it is that we instill, or we believe we're instilling values, but it also highlights the fact that instilling values and demonstrating value are two very different things. And when we, I want to connect it to the point you made just now about how it is that children are sometimes too well connected with social media. And the reason for that, I believe, is because they go to social media to get what they're not getting in their environment. And this is not a slight or an attack against parents who have difficulties with children going to social media. I'm saying as parents, as the caregivers, the nurturers, the ones that are supposed to be educating and teaching our children, we need to recognize that if we're not seeing the results that we would like to see in them, there's a number of things that come into play on there. One of it is that we may not be connecting with them the way we think we are, or the way they need us to. The other thing is that they are driven more by the influences that are greater than our influence over them. And the other thing also is that they get a certain value, whether we agree or disagree with the value they get, they are getting a certain value from that social attention or that social media influences and that whole lifestyle. So if we don't understand what they're getting from that and offer a healthier form of them being able to get that same emotional and spiritual fulfillment through a more healthier means, then we lose that. We lose that connection with them. But we also lose the ability to be able to influence them when we don't recognize that we might be part of a village that goes against the values that we're trying to instill in them. And I think that is one of the bigger problems we've got. We don't realize that we're not operating in the little village anymore. We're operating in, and I hate using the term because it's so cliched, but we are operating in a global village. When we were kids, if our parents said something, we saw what they said echoed by the village around us, because that's the view that everyone maintained, and there was a consistency in that. So we had no reason to doubt that that's the way the world worked. Now, if we tell our children something, they've got any number of influences that they've got direct access to that tells them that, nope, that's not the way it works. Here's alternatives. So we need to understand what we're dealing with. Otherwise, we're going to be trying to raise children with methods and with means and with rules that are no longer relevant in the way the world works.
Absolutely, and we're seeing so much of that, children who are really far removed from the reality. Either they're over-coddled or they're the opposite end extreme, where they're just left to their own devices. And we're seeing that they are struggling, spiritually especially, that they're struggling in this world.
Yes, and it's a very difficult thing, because as parents, we act with sincerity and understanding of what it is that we're trying to protect our children from, what we're trying to prepare them for. But we need to go beyond being driven by that fear of what's going to happen if we don't. We need to connect with why there is value in what we're asking them to adopt, so that they can experience that value in the way we conduct ourselves, so that they would want that for themselves, rather than they must accept it because we say so and that we're their parents, so they need to trust us. And this is why we find it so difficult to be able to communicate with them, because we don't understand how to demonstrate the value of that. And often our behavior versus our words carry contradictions in them. And those contradictions then just win favor for the village to have more influence than us.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. So if we talk about akhlaq, Coach Zaid, we're talking about, how important that is. And we know that at a young age, parents do a lot to instill that akhlaq in children, the manners, the etiquette, the please and thank yous and all of that when they're at a very young age. And that's also emphasized in the broader village, in the schools and the madrasas and community. But somehow at some point that stops and our young men and women are not taught beyond that. So it's just the basics, the niceties, the politeness, and the manners, but nothing goes beyond that age of, say, 8 or 10 years old. What is it that we can do for our tweens and teens? How can we continue to develop that akhlaq in them, nurture that in them? How can we ensure that we have young adults who are a pleasure to be around, who are well-mannered, who have adab and etiquette, who are gentlemen and gentlewomen, who are respectful? I'm wondering why we somehow just stop so abruptly around the age of 8 and 10. And we wonder then why our young adults don't have any manners as they grow older, or in their teens, or as young adults.
I think the one thought that always comes to mind when this topic comes up is you cannot give what you don't have. So if we want them to be respectable, if we want them to have good akhlaq, good character, then we need to understand what it is that they have within themselves, how it is that they feel about themselves, that they believe people around them deserve, right? Because that's how they start training. This is how we figure out how to engage with the world, is that I need to either do things because no one's there for me, or I need to do things because if I do it a certain way, I know I can get a certain response, and then we see people like that as being manipulative. Or we treat others the way we want to be treated because we have that self-respect, that self-worth. But more directly to your question is that I find it somewhat disheartening that we don't realize how much we're outsourcing the establishment of character in our children. We expect it to be installed through teaching. But character is not adopted through teaching. Character is adopted through life experience. I mean, as adults, we know this. We know that we were in probably not as good a shape as a character when we were in our teens or our 20s. And as we got things wrong, those experiences either made us better or built character in us. And depending what we chose from that is what will determine whether our character became enriched or did it become more repulsive over the years. And that's because of the choices we made relative to what we were led to believe was the way the world works and what we could expect from it, right? And I know this sounds a bit philosophical, but I want to try and connect it to something a bit more like real. If we outsource our children's character building to schools and madrasas and extracurricular activities, we're not allowing them to develop that bond with us where we do things with them rather than tell them what to do. And I think that is the biggest thing that is lacking, is that there isn't enough meaningful engagement, meaningful participation in their life and them in our life, because everything is so structured and so rigid and everything has its time and its place and everyone must know their place, and there's rituals and boundaries and discipline that they must observe, or else, and that or else then has all various forms of consequences, some harsh, some gentle, some completely irrelevant, that doesn't land the point that we want. So there's a lot of rethinking we need to do around this, about how it is that we establish character in our children, because our children's character is a combination of the good and the bad that they have that they observe or experience in both their parents. And if we start recognizing that and we're willing to be more honest with ourselves about that, we'll see what it is that they took from us that is not the best of us. And we'll also recognize what it took of us that might be the better of us. But when we're willing to recognize that, we can adjust our approach to them and our engagement with them so that we can hopefully recalibrate or correct what it is that we think we might have gotten wrong. But we need to, as parents, step up and take first accountability for the character of our children. and not assume that they're under influence from society and they're under influence from school or from madrasa, and that's why they're behaving this way. And then we change madrasas and change schools, and we keep changing things, and we don't realize that in doing that we create more volatility and emotional insecurity in them, because they don't have an opportunity to establish a grounding point. And all the while, that grounding point that's supposed to be home is not even focused on, because we're so focused on trying to get it right.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me, my son is in his early 20s, and he said that he finds it so disappointing, but also worrying that young people, he says, just don't have that common etiquette. And he said, he's talking about, we live in a Muslim country, and he says, he's talking about many Muslim youth who just, and he says, where were their parents? He used the same word, outsourcing. He says, who did they outsource, their upbringing to? Because he said, in some cases, he says you just stand there and your jaw literally drops when you just see their etiquette or their behavior. So, yeah, I think if anything, it hits home that we, like you said, we should not be outsourcing this, and not the spiritual development of our children. Yes, all of them play a part, but at home, and as you mentioned, it begins in the womb. I want to circle around back to something, when we began this discussion about preparing our children for adulthood and how important it is, and how many of the adults today are technically not even adult in terms of our behavior, our mindset, our etiquette, our spiritual development. As someone who works in coaching, how do you see this being something about an inner child playing out? Is there this wounded inner child? What's your take on that? Because we read and hear a lot about that.
My views on this is extremely contentious, so fair warning. The inner child, I think, is a horrible distraction. This concept of the inner child, because I often ask people, because a lot of people come to me and say, I need to heal my inner child, or I need to reparent the inner child. And I ask them, what does that look like? And they usually can't answer. In fact, not a single person is being able to give me a coherent answer that actually makes sense. They just hear that there is this potential, that there's an inner child wound within you that needs to be healed, and that's why you are the way you are. And I disagree with that, because what it does is it creates a separation, it creates a detachment from who you are versus who you think you should be. And what we have to do is we need to start being more honest with ourselves, kindly honest. Not necessarily brutal. When I say brutal honesty, I usually refer to that we mustn't try and massage the truth so that it's more palatable for us. But we must be willing to accept the truth for what it is so that we can do something with it. Otherwise, if you're in denial about what the truth is, then you prevent yourself from being able to offer or put effort into an effective solution to it. So when we talk about inner child healing and all of those things, what we need to recognize is it's really just that in this phase of our life, our experiences as children, whatever we took from our parents that I mentioned earlier, that's shaping what it is that we think of ourselves and expect of ourselves. And the best way to remedy that is not to look at the inner child. The best way to remedy that is to understand why your parents couldn't show up better than that for you. When you understand why, and this is another point of contention, because people usually hear, especially if we had an unpleasant experience with our parents, and people hear, why must I understand them? Because that feels as if I'm letting them off the hook, and then who's going to hold them accountable, and how can you blame me for this? That's not what understanding is about. Understanding is about literally looking at what were the circumstances, what did they have to work with, who were they as humans, what was that they were, what environment were they raised in that turned them into the adults that they were, who showed up as your parents in the best way that they could. So that when you understand that, you realize that it wasn't because you weren't good enough as a child for them not to have more time for you or not to be more gentle with you. It's that was the best they could offer. And what you can take from that is understand what is it about you that you might be holding back from your children because of exactly those same so-called wounds that we carry with us. Because the more you're looking at your inner child, the more you are distracted from your child.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah.
So we need to be very careful about how it is that we believe we're going to find solutions and peace and harmony in our homes, because the one thing that I can say with absolute certainty, every single time without fail, personal experience, first-hand observation, and working with clients, is that the people that struggle the most with parenting are the people that are trying their best not to be like their own parents.
Interesting.
Because when you do that, you throw the baby out with the bathwater. You end up discarding the wisdom and also the effort and the struggle that they went through to offer you something that was better than what they had. And this is another point that often comes up, and forgive me if I'm digressing from the topic, but I think it bears in on our ability to raise our children more effectively, is that the moment we lose sight of the struggle behind the human, or the human behind the struggle in our parents, we lose sight of our humanness in our role as parents. And that's how we end up ruling with fear and obedience and discipline and harshness. Because then every time we are disrespected, or every time we are defied, we feel as if it's a personal attack rather than understanding where the child is at for them to cause them to behave in that way.
Yep.
So we're so far off the mark that it feels as if we're getting everything wrong, but we're not. We're not getting everything wrong. We just need to realize that there's one. I think if I had to distill it down to a single point, I would hazard a guess that there is one single thing that is missing in our relationship with our children that will make a massive difference to everything, and that is that our children have no way of connecting with the human that is trying to raise them, because there's not a single parent that has deliberately or consciously tried to give their children worse than what they had.
Yeah. Wow. Definitely. Yeah, it makes you think of many people you speak to, and they say, "Oh, I'm in the parenting journey, so I'm just doing everything I can not to parent like my mom or dad." Not to, or I sound just like them, and I don't want to be like that. And the more you resist that, and then like you said, what about all the hikmah, the wisdom that we throw away because of that? When we're on that path, trailblazing, and don't want to, completely want to disconnect in that way. And, we talk about silatul rahim, the ties of the womb, and it's not just the physical disconnection, but many of us emotionally disconnect if we're just picking on psychological or personal development terms, and then not knowing what we want to do with it, and then just trying to somehow fit that into our life within also at the same time the lens of Islam. So I think we need to really exercise that caution and have a lot of clarity on that vision. But I enjoyed and I appreciated what you mentioned about that kindness with which we approach ourselves as well.
Yes.
As well as our parents. Yeah.
And in fact, if we just consider that point for a second,
Yes.
You know what I said about you can't give what you don't have? If you find that your internal discussion about yourself and about what you're failing at or what you're not, what you don't have in life, and that if you find that the tone of that internal discussion is harsh, that means that it takes that much more energy and focus from you to not be as harsh with others. And that strain eventually wears you out.
Oh yeah. There's only so much I think a person could carry that weight for.
Yeah.
Emotionally, yes, absolutely. And we're never meant to carry something that heavy. Definitely not. Yeah. Well, our time with you is almost coming to a close. So perhaps if we could get in one more question with you, please.
Sure.
And we spoke about conversation, so if we can come back to that. Why do you see it as important for our children to have, I'm not sure if adult is the right word, but is it mature conversations, age-appropriate conversations? We say that 10, 12 upwards. I think many times we may be talking down to our children and not even realize that. We baby them, and this is not coming from a space of compassion or kindness or gentleness, but it's feeling that we need to protect them or we need to cuddle them. And then at what age, if you're coddling, at what age do you actually then start preparing them for adulthood? right? And then there's also that assumption that children should not be in conversation. So adults are speaking, and you sit on the kids' table, you go and play, and yet there are kids that are very emotionally mature and are able to hold their stand in a good conversation. I'm wondering why culturally don't we include our children in stimulating intellectual conversations, discussions, debates, dialogues? Why is that frowned upon? Why is that something that many parents cower away from or are afraid about or feel repulsed by?
I think it's part of that mindset that we're raised with, to believe that you must know your place. And we believe that as long as our children know their place, we're doing a good job of parenting them. And as long as they respect our place, we feel respected and appreciated. But I think, whenever we talk about these things, I always remind myself of the number of examples from the days of the Sahaba where there were young people that took up leadership positions and that played pivotal roles in society. And that's what convinces me more than anything else, that it is entirely possible to have a teenager who has maturity and understanding to be able to lead adults. But not if we're raising children. Because if you're raising children, you're raising a child. You're raising someone to be a child. You're raising someone to have a certain expectation and a certain level of responsibility. And then when they're ready for adulthood, or not ready, I wouldn't even say ready, when they are expected to be adults, then we expect them to be adults. We haven't treated them as adults up to that point. But now we want to put them into a relationship, into a marriage, into a home, into a parenting role. And we expect them to get it right because, we raised you better than this. And I think we're setting them up for failure. I think the reason why we find it so difficult to include them in our discussions is because we find it, we lose sight of the difference between, are we discussing something that is between the adults of an issue that needs to be addressed or resolved within the family unit of some sort? Or are we just discussing like kind of worldly matters that are important, where they should be party to those discussions? And the taboo that we create around how children are supposed to be able to be exposed to or participate in those discussions, we need to realize that that global village is ready to school them on all the stuff that we're not willing to school them on. So you either school your children first, or you send them out to let the village school them for you. And if you let the village school them for you because you're trying to maintain this sensitivity and this preciousness about know your place, then you lose the right to complain about the fact that the village is not raising them the way you would want them to be raised.
Absolutely. Makes me wonder why our youth are not more inclusive in the faith-centered atmosphere or environment. If we think of it, majority of our hufaz in most Jamaat khanas and masajid are youth. They're teenagers, young adults, they're in university, and they're leading us for 29, 30 nights for the whole Quran Taraweeh. And that's where it stops.
Yes.
There's no mentorship after that. Our sons and our daughters memorize the Quran, and that's often, not always, but often where it ends. And I'm not saying that lightly. I am a female Quran mentor for 20 odd years, so I say this from experience, but that we have our children, our sons and daughters memorize the Quran, and it stops at that point. And not just the knowledge, but the mentorship, the spiritual development and growth of our youth stop there. So we are, and I encourage our listeners to really think about this. We are okay and we're comfortable with our youth leading the salah, and that's a noble thing, mashallah. But why are we not comfortable with them being part of family shura, family council, about topics that affect and impact them, or about talking about world issues, talking about things that matter to them in the world that they are living in and the world they will live in, a world where sexuality is a big topic, masculinity, femininity, all of these are topics that they're not being taught, they're not talking that through with people around them in their own small village. Then, like you mentioned, they're going to be schooled by a bigger village that no one has control over or no one has their best interest for, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. There's so many important points you mentioned there. And the one thing that I find the most almost scary out of all of it is that we raise them with this really huge, blessed kind of burden of responsibility. For example, when we raise them to be huffaz, or when we raise them to be imams, but we don't prepare them for the leadership role that automatically imposes on them in the community. And that's how you end up with sincere advice givers giving bad advice, because they are skilled or trained and taught in the religious matters, but not in life. And then people go to them for life advice, and we're just adding layer upon layer of dysfunction to our community.
It reminds me of something. I think about a month ago, my dad, a very sprightly, elderly gentleman, may Allah preserve him with good health. Anyway, he is an amputee, very resilient, and he comes back from Jumu'ah, and we have our usual chat, and he tells me what it was like, because of course, in many instances in South Africa, in many parts of South Africa, women don't have access to that opportunity. So he said, well, this is what the khutbah was about. And he said, excellent speaker, eloquent speaker, very sincere, but he said, unschooled in life. And I said, what do you mean by that? He said, I'm sitting there as a heart patient, having experienced kidney failure, as a cancer survivor, an amputee, and he says to the whole congregation as part of his khutbah is, you can't be sad and grateful at the same time to Allah. And he sat back and he said, I thought to myself, well, I can be both. I can grieve, I can be sad about having lost a part of my limbs, but I can also be grateful at the same time. And he said to himself that, how was this young man who has such talent, why was he not mentored? Why was he not coached?
Yes.
Why he said that was the saddest thing that he saw that day. He says he can't forget that. It's
extremely disheartening, and the thing that jumps out the most at me in that is that young man gave advice that completely conflicts with the experience of the Prophet ﷺ when he went through his year of sorrow.
Yes.
So why is it that we've lost that sensibility about the Sunnah?
Indeed we have. But anyway, let's bring this to full circle. And what would your piece of, where's that glimmer of hope? Where's the glimmer that we're concluding with today? Because we're an ummah of hope and optimism, not a toxic positivity, but optimism that is grounded and anchored in our faith. So take us up, give us some glimmer of hope to conclude for today, please.
I think the most powerful thing you can do for your children is to allow them to connect with you as a human. And that's not a philosophical kind of ideal. If you are allowing yourself to be human to your children, they will feel safer to be human with you. And that's where it all starts, because everything, empathy, compassion, understanding, it all starts with seeing the human behind it. Otherwise, we're just making ourselves judges and jurors in judging people's behavior and then determining whether they deserve reward or punishment. So we need to move beyond that. And it's not a difficult thing to do. It's just a matter of mindfulness about how much of ourselves we are preventing our children from knowing and then expecting them to grow up to be better than us.
Absolutely. Well, again, there's so much to unpack. I think definitely not only listeners but myself, I need to go back on this interview, listen in and make notes and look at what I need to implement in my life and in my circle and village as well. So we want to thank you for that, Jazakumullah khair, and we hope that you get the opportunity, continue getting the opportunity to be part of the nurturing and mentorship of many of our youth, inshallah.
Ameen.
Jazakumullah khair, and we look forward to connecting with you next week for part 2 as we continue exploring how to prepare our children for adulthood and beyond, inshallah.
Looking forward to it. Jazakumullah khair.